Wrap it up in a bundle on the line. Wrap it up in a bundle on the line. Of the stars, stars. Of the stars, stars. Taking a pour through the funnel on the line. Taking a pour through the funnel on the line of your heart, heart. Of your heart, heart. Drip it out in a bottle, carries you down. Drip it out in a bottle, carries you down to your child.
And Steve is the lecturer today. And do we have a topic for your lecture?
If I'm not mistaken, the title is The Whispering of the Tao.
Okay, so I imagine it has something to do with Taoism.
I hope so. We'll find out.
And Steve, you've been practicing, I don't even know if I'm expressing it the right way, but sort of Taoism's been what you've been sort of living by for how long?
I'd say the whole of it.
The whole of
really,
it.
You know,
Even as a little child.
I think I largely escaped kind of any shift in the path, but you know, at the point at which I became conscious of and purposely followed it and studied it and taught it, that kind of thing, 30 years, something like that. Yeah.
And you make one of the ways you make your living is as a healer, for lack of a better.
Sure.
Yeah, you have a studio.
Yeah.
You teach Tai Chi, right? I'm just giving a little background so people know.
Sure.
So
yeah.
You teach Tai Chi, and then you also do healing for people. I think you were saying that relaxation alone seems to.
Yeah, like I find that creating the space for healing, which is not just a physical process, although that's part of it, but creating the space, holding that space, entering into that space, inviting somebody to enter into that space of healing, it really does most of the healing. You know, a nice space, authentic intention, gentleness, patience, quiet usually. Most of the healing, you know, the bum shoulder or the guilt or whatever, most of it really subsides because it's held on. The injury or affect is present and causing suffering because it's being held to.
Yeah.
Often the person stricken, I suppose, which makes it sound really serious, the person feels like they're being held by the injury, the guilt, the suffering, the anxiety, the bad knee, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think it's really kind of the other way around. They're holding. It's dukkha in Buddhism. They're holding on to the dissatisfaction. Yeah.
And we were talking a little bit before, which is, I should tell anybody watching this that Steve literally just arrived in town, and I almost kind of forced him. Maybe guilt trip.
There might have been a tackle.
Just sit down, let me put the camera on. But because I found some of the things you were saying so interesting, and we were talking about conformity.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, was there a hint of maybe you were hinting at that non-conformity in a sense might be a way towards healing? Or is that going too far?
No, I think authentic experience,
whether
conforming or not, is a path of health. I think health is also is a spectrum too. I don't think you shift into poor health and shift into better health. I don't think you become unhealthy and now you're healthy. You're always on this line somewhere, and that line is called health. And you might be far to the left, far to the right, however you see the line. But that line is, it's the human condition. We're alive. It's a degree of aliveness, and how much vitality there is, how much pain there is. One of my teachers, Rick, who we were just talking about, Rick Barrett, his definition of pain is something that the body has not yet understood.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I think suffering is something that your mind is reaching outside the present moment. Suffering is your mind reaching outside dissatisfaction is a really nice translation of the term often used in Buddhism, and it's experiencing the present to some degree, but an expectation of it being a different way. Like, I thought it would be warm in here, and it's not. Now I'm dissatisfied. Well, if I was just here, it's not satisfaction or dissatisfaction. I'm just present. But if I'm thinking, I thought they said the heat would be higher. Now my mind is outside the present experience. And now it makes it a little more difficult. If that caused me pain, probably just a little bit of heat in the room is different. Maybe somebody wouldn't call that pain. But then my body finds it, or my psychic space, my mind, my heart finds it difficult to understand that because it's busy being somewhere else. It can't be fully present. So I think those two ideas are related, that dissatisfaction and failure to resolve into understanding or full apprehension the present experience of the self.
So are you saying that there has to be a balance with body and mind? But are you almost hinting that the body is wiser than the mind, as far as...
If I was only almost hinting, I feel like I failed a little bit. I was trying to scream it.
That might be your audience.
Here's the way. I'm not an old guy, but I'm definitely not young anymore. So I'm 40 odd. And if you're older listening to this, you'll think, well, he's just a kid. And if you're younger, you'll think that old guy's still talking. But in my experience, my body has never once given me a bum steer. My heart, my mind, that's what they do. That's their wheelhouse, right?
Yeah.
Let's get the extra large hot fudge sundae.
Yeah.
I wonder if she'll like me. My heart,
Right.
that's what they do.
Right.
That's what they do.
Yeah.
But if I can bring those into union with my body, then I have a shot at having an authentic life, a real experience of the self now.
So do you like the word or the concept spiritual, or do you find that not useful?
I think people, I just flew here from O'Hare, and that has more baggage than where I just came from. The term spiritual, like, man, whoever hears the term listening, you already think you know what that means, so you won't hear me. Here's what I teach, the one because I'm comfortable. Here's what the elbow does. Here's where the hand moves. Here's where the eyes go. Here's what the breath does. I'm comfortable doing that. Not necessarily good, but that's what I can do. And as I age and practice and develop a fullness of my own practice and understanding, I'm more comfortable talking about the emotions in the mind, right? So maybe another level of things. What I tell my students is, this exercise is designed to release the spirit, right? Whatever that is, and that's what I say next, whatever that is. My feeling is that if you have a sense of your body, to whatever degree you do, and if you have a sense of your heart-mind, to whatever degree you do, if you additionally have a sense that those haven't covered all the bases, if you have a sense that there's something besides those that makes up you, let's just call that spirit, right? But I don't know what it is. It's dark matter. It's dark energy. I don't know what it is. But some people have a real true sense that I know what the body part is. I know what the heart mind is, the feeling, the thinking, the psychology. I know what those parts, but I feel like there's something or some nothing else. Let's just call that spirit so that we can have a dialogue and experience things. But why would I teach it? What do I know?
Steve's good friend Ben is sitting here. Ben, do you want to ask it? Have me bring up?
I had a thought, I had a question when you were talking about time and the body being superior. I remember one of my teachers, Ann, giving me a book a long time. She was a Ralpher. She gave me
Ralph, yeah.
The Wisdom of the Body.
That hurt just hearing that.
Yeah, but it hurt so good. But that book was exceptional, and it was one of the first times that I read a really strong argument for the wisdom of the body. And one of the things that I came away from with that was that the body is anchored into the present moment in a way that the mind is going to either be in the past or in the future. It's either going to remember or it's going to project, whereas the body cannot. The body is our anchor.
Right. Are you asking a question?
Well, I'm asking if you think I am sort of asking the question, but it's more or less, do you agree with the fact that the body is stuck in this not stuck isn't the right word.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say stuck or anchored. I don't feel like a fish is stuck in the ocean.
Right.
I mean, if I'm in an airplane, I might call it stuck, but the fish wouldn't. It's just how it is.
How about a better word being in sync? It moves in
No,
sync.
because stuck, anchored, and in sync all suggest it could be other places.
Not the body.
That's what I'm saying. To call the body stuck, in sync, or anchored to the present is to suggest that it could be anywhere else, right? Because if it can be in sync, it could be out of sync. But in terms of the present, it can't be, right? So I feel like there's three different aspects of time or degrees or levels or perspective and whatever, past, present, and future. Pretty simple. And for the sake of not an argument, we'll just say there's three parts to the self. There's the body, there's the heart, mind, and the spirit. Of course, we could have a whole discourse. Maybe there's other parts. But I think body, mind, heart, and spirit sort of cover the ordinary bases that we might consider. The mind, or the heart, if you want to think of them as separate or together, it doesn't matter to me. Those can exist. They can move outside the present moment, as Ben was suggesting. Right? I can have heartache. I can be excited. I can have sorrow. I can have guilt. Right? I can think about what I'm going to have for dinner tonight, and I can think about the lost baggage at O'Hare. I can have my mind go to the past and the future. I can have my heart go to the past and the future. So the spirit, I'm going to guess if the heart and the mind can go past and future, so could the spirit. For the purposes of my argument, it doesn't matter if the spirit can move outside the present moment. Here's what matters. The body is necessarily only and ever in the present moment. Period. That's it. Period. That's it. Period. That's it. That's an ellipsis. 3 periods. So that was some door closing. I said 3 periods and then there was an exclamation. So now you know what's happening. So the body is necessarily and always and only in the present moment. Health, we talked about this kind of line of health. Health comes from, the word health comes from the Old English word hael, H-A-E-L. Later becoming H-A-L-E. Sometime after that becoming this thing we use when we talk about soup, hail. Hail means whole, W-H-O-L-E. Also root word of holy, so we get into the spiritual and the rest. Whole. So where can we be healthy? We can only be healthy where and when, same word, where and when. We can only be healthy where we are whole. We can only be whole where the parts of the self can meet. And if they make a plan to meet in the future, the body won't make it. And if they make a plan to meet in the past, the body will miss that RSVP. If they make a plan to meet in the present, is the only place they can meet, and therefore the only time. Which is to say, the only way to be healthy is to be present. All of it. Whatever, again, we said heart, mind, spirit, and body. Even if there's more, because the body is stuck, anchored, in sync in the present, right? Like it's necessarily and always and only in the present, the meeting place, the wholeness, and therefore health must occur there. That's it, right? And what I teach is to look at an experience of the body, like an ache or a sorrow or a excitement, and notice how they're all necessarily related to something outside this moment, right? A real experience of this moment is not going to be excitement. I might be saying we on the roller coaster, but in line I'm excited. And at the end of the roller coaster I'm sad because it's over. But on the roller coaster, in that moment, you're saying we, or you're shrieking, or you're looking around, or you're holding your breath, whatever, you're having a real experience. Beforehand, you're excited to get on. But it's not what your body's doing. Your body's waiting in line. So whether the experience, the real experience, is something you'd call positive or negative, like a good one or a bad experience, if it's related to something outside the moment, it's unhealthy. So Taoists wouldn't want you to be excited, and they wouldn't want you to be sorrowful. They'd want you to be present.
So wouldn't there be a risk of there being something inauthentic about that, or is it just conditioning? I mean, like, what if there's something, whatever, triggers me and I get excited, and then I say, oh, I forgot the Taoist teaching, I'm not supposed to be excited. Wouldn't that be inauthentic?
Right, so the Taoist teaching wouldn't be you're not supposed to be excited. It's just to say, hey, if you're interested, you probably aren't because you're excited, but if you're interested, that's taking you outside the moment. That's part of moving away from wholeness and therefore health. It may be a natural thing. It may be something that happens, but that Tao is about balance, right? That exact amount of excitement will be balanced by that amount of suffering.
Right.
Right.
So when something really bad or quote unquote good happens to you, how do you stay equilibrium? Keep equilibrium.
I was going to ask on the same note, phrase it a little differently. Would you say that the capacity for equanimity is in some way increased through practices that are in mindfulness? In other words, if the more you train the mind to be full of the present, then the more likely when you need to be present, you're going to have the capacity to be full of the present. So that equanimity, when something happens, if it's something that's major, you're right. I think it would be very inauthentic if I heard some distressing news about somebody.
I just want the microphone to pick up, but it's okay.
Okay.
I can crank it up later.
If I heard some distressing news about somebody that I knew, if I just was talking to you on the way in. If I heard flight such and such is crashed, there are 3 survivors. Yeah, it would be really pretentious for me to pretend like, oh, I don't care if my friend's squirming under a plane wing somewhere. That would be, for me, inauthentic. But for someone who was a greater sage and understood that his life isn't permanent anyway, and really understood that and could really experience that and really come to terms with, I may have just lost, or I am. Right now, I'm losing all my friends. We're all dying. I can't experience that in depth because I don't have the chops for it. But some people do.
Uh-huh.
So, like let's say something gets through, and
sure.
and you're maybe unguarded, and something, a loss or a gain, whatever that would be.
Right, good news or bad
so
news.
How do you return to steadiness? That is, do you have a practice technique for that?
Yeah, well, if you find yourself veering off to the right, and you want to get back into your lane, and let's say you're veering 30 degrees, pulling the wheel back rapidly to the other direction is not going to get you back into the lane, right? So I think there's sort of a gravity of the equanimity that if you can release from the urge, the pulling either way, then that gravity will find you back in the center. It's not an active, oh my goodness, I'm here, let me get there. Because then I'm adding another level of anxiety or intensity or wrongness, or I'm adding a sense of immorality to it, like I shouldn't be here, I need to get there. And then I'm adding suffering about the suffering, the fact that I was out of equanimity, right? And then that's not helpful either. But as Ben was suggesting, Ben was talking earlier, the equanimity, I think, through practice becomes this sort of, I always think of it as a rudder. It's just this, like just having that rudder in the water just kind of brings you back to the course, right? Also, in Taoism, it's essentially, it could be translated as balanceism or something.
Really?
Yeah, it's about balance. Like it's equal parts, peanut butter and jelly. And I don't know, that's the translation from the Chinese. Some of the viewers might not know. But the balance isn't necessarily staying in the middle. It's also on balance. To the degree that you're here, you'll end up at this degree. And the average, the mean, this is the balance. So it's balance, I think, is really well understood as this dynamic experience between these two different poles. It isn't just stay in the middle, walk the line, right?
Yeah.
So even functionally, if you're doing your standing practice, and I come up and try and push you, and there's a force coming at you at a straight-on angle.
Sure.
The way that you respond to that, I can actually feel that force not go. You're not resisting it. You're not coming against it. It's not
right.
an interplay. It doesn't happen on a horizontal realm. It happens on a horizontal/vertical realm. And my energy, you can either take down or up.
Right.
Kind of position.
Right, and I think that's, like I was trying to describe, that gravity is that through practice, that sort of gravity is not maybe the perfect word that Carolines are going. That gravity will draw something else into its orbit or onto its path. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so a weaker force, somebody that's just sort of testing the standing practice, they'll just, as you were describing, they'll just find their way into that stronger flow, that central current, and it ultimately moderates things, right?
One of the difficult things to talk about, especially when you're talking about practicing, doing a sort of Eastern practice in the West, is ego, and it's hard to even agree what people are talking about when they say the word ego, and ego gets kind of an original sin rap sometimes. So how do you, first of all, how would you define ego? And because some people would say automatically, oh, ego is bad, but it seems like we have to have a certain hardware and software just to walk down the hallway.
Sure. So I call this my elbow because I learned that in school. But that thing, this area, this energy center, this space, this volume, whatever, this has never said it's an elbow. So I'm just calling it an elbow, and that's a good working term because we're speaking English today. Same with all the other parts, which I'll save you from having to see. The ego is the only part that purports to name itself. It's the thing that says, I, right? But what it's trying to name is not itself, because it's the namer, not the named.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like standing in front of a mirror saying, oh, that's me. No, I see the confusion, totally reasonable. But you're the namer. That's the named, right? And so whatever the ego believes itself to be, it's pointing at something else, right? So to try and get a sense of what the ego is, you can't ask the ego, right? So a friend of mine, Jonathan, who's a Taoist teacher and a scientist, he talks about ultimately, what's the mind, what's the self, what's the consciousness? And he says, the best answer he can get is that ultimately at the very end of a lot of practice and, difficulty and challenge and effort and persistence and all that, at the end of that, whatever it is that says, that's me, the thing that's saying that is you. Ultimately, when it says that's me, that's not you. But whatever said that's me is you. Right? It's the namer, not the named.
Kind of get it.
Kind of get it. Right.
So maybe more maybe we'll.
Sure.
This is what we might have started with more generally. What drew you, or what draws you to Taoism? It's an awkward way of saying it, but so, why is that your practice and not Dianetics?
For me, first of all, Taoism is a philosophy, not a religion. Two, Taoism is a philosophy that doesn't moralize. So there's no good, there's no bad. There's no right, there's no wrong, there's no better, there's no worse. There's just how things are. It's a proto-scientific view of the world. It's a shamanistic view of the world. That sits with me well. It feels accurate. It feels like an effort by humanity to describe where they find themselves. And whereas most other philosophies seem like an effort by humanity to describe how and who they are, not where they are.
And describing where you are, you feel
Nature,
more
the
helpful.
World. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And
in other words, how it would be without us. Whether or not we're here, this is how things are.
Yeah.
So it doesn't purport to describe a society or a culture or etiquette or rules. It purports to describe, like a scientist might, how the world works, which we can describe in terms of rules. When the sun, when the planet tilts this way around, it becomes spring, and we can describe these things. But they didn't develop from rules, whereas a society and a culture will develop from rules that were described.
And you were very gracious in complimenting our library when you walked in. But I did notice that the thing that you went to, as we were joking about, is the plant.
Yeah.
Not the books.
Yeah.
So, but have there been key books in Taoism that have been central to you, that you really loved?
Yeah. There's not too many.
Yeah.
There's the Tao Te Ching, about the most translated book in the world, on par with the Bible, or more, slightly less. I'm not sure anymore. Chuang Tzu's writing, Thomas Merton's translation is a good one, in my view. I'm a fan of Stephen Mitchell's version of the Tao Te Ching. So chapter 1, there's 81 chapters. If you're not familiar with the Tao Te Ching, they're poems really, so don't be scared by the word chapters. They fit on a page usually. Chapter 1 says, look, we'd like to talk about Taoism, but here's the problem. We can't name it, right? It can't be named. The idea of naming it gets you off course immediately. It's unavailable to naming conventions. It's unavailable to the grasping of the wise mind. But Lao Tzu goes on to say, in the following 80 chapters, I happen to have a pen here and I'm writing, so I'm going to give you 80 more chapters on it. But by the way, as I said in the very beginning, there's no point writing about it. I always think that this is the equivalent of a poet writing about love, who knows they'll never get it, right? I mean, I'll never get down this feeling I'm having now. It won't. I'll have nice moments and frustrating moments, and I'll have nice little turns of phrase, but I'll never really get across to you what I'm feeling with the words. They don't suffice. They will never suffice. They're a different. They're a different universe. The words and the feeling, the thing or not thing, and so I think Taoism is the same idea. It's like, or books on Taoism. It's like, I'd like to, but it'll never happen. But nevertheless, I'm going to try. And so the poet might come to that realization early on, the one that I just described. But you know what they're going to do? They're going to write love poems for their whole lives. They can't help themselves, right? So too with Taoism, right? Chuang-Tzu writes about, words and there's a story about a prince reading an old book from the library, the dead master, and he's gonna, get the wisdom, and nearby is the wheelwright who's fixing some spokes or something, and they have a discussion, and the wheelwright says essentially that you're kind of wasting your time, and then of course the prince says, well, since you've insulted me and these are really famous people and their wisdom, and I'm going to have to take your head unless you can explain what you meant and it makes sense. And what he had said was something to the effect of, what you're holding there is just the muddy footsteps of the masters. And what he goes on to describe, of course, it's to be understood through his authentic and sincere experience in the real world. He's just a lowly wheelwright, working with his hands and the earth and the trees and so forth, is that whatever the masters knew, whatever their knowledge was, it can't have gotten to you through the books. So you're holding their one, last manuscript, the only living copy and so forth, but that's not their wisdom. It's just what they wrote. It's just their footprints. It's just the crumbs from under their fingernails. So the understanding for the prince or the king, however the story is, was that can't be knowledge. Knowledge is not in the books. Just as in music, music is not to be found in the notes. It's the space between the notes, right? Most of every page, we're in a big library here, most of every page is white. It's not words. Most of every page is not words. And even the words are mostly not the wisdom, that we can suppose the author had, right? They're broken and faulty attempts to express the experience of the wisdom, right? And so this is something that comes up in Taoism all the time. Go experience it. Taoism, when I first started studying, was like, well, where do I go learn this? And the answer was, well, in the body. And that, for me, became Tai Chi. That's a practice of the body for Taoists. But it isn't go to this guru and read this book and chant this sutra and transcribe this illuminated text. And it's feel it, watch the minnows make mud pies, run in the bamboo. Like it's feel it, right? So all of the books can ultimately point towards the wisdom, right? And perhaps point away from some mistakes, but they actually aren't the wisdom. They aren't actually the feeling. They aren't the love, right?
So in practicing Tai Chi, you've had maybe this experience that the Taoist books point to?
If you say so.
Okay.
I hope, yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the practice of Tai Chi?
Sure. Do you have a specific kind of a question, or?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
Just real. It may be introductory at first. Somebody who's never done it or doesn't even know what it is.
Okay. Yeah. So Tai Chi is the full term is Tai Chi Chuan, but it's just like I'm Steve instead of Steven. It's easier to say Tai Chi. That's what people say. But so we're clear. It's Tai Chi Chuan. So Tai Chi, the first part. Is it's a practice of balance, which is a dynamic experience of differentiating energies. So when I'm moving in Tai Chi, there's a rising hand and a falling hand. There's a closing hand and an opening hand. There's a retreating hand and a moving forward hand. There's a sinking into one leg and a rising in the other. There's a substantial feeling on this side of the feeling paired with an insubstantial feeling on the other side. There's a equal parts move to the left, move to the right, this sort of a thing. What it looks like is somebody moving with no motive other than the body's expression of the feeling it has in that moment. So it looks like it's complete, but no more than complete. So it's spare, right? It's simple, but it's not so simplified as to be missing, to be incomplete in some way, right? Which, that's sort of my definition of beauty, which is to find the least amount of completeness. And then you recognize it as beautiful, as opposed to complex or busy or confusing. But somewhat incomplete doesn't seem beautiful either. It's just like, oh, something, I kind of want to like that maybe. And Tai Chi feels like it's right at that sweet spot, right at that moment, not unlike many other modalities, whether it be Hatha Yoga or something.
And do you remember when you, like the first time you either saw it or tried it yourself, or you learned from a teacher?
Yeah, I remember the first time. I don't remember the first time I saw it. I remember the first time I practiced it, though.
Can you remember what that felt like?
Oh yeah, I felt like I couldn't do anything right. I felt like I was, whatever the opposite of an adept is. I felt like I couldn't do anything right.
Really?
Yeah, and I didn't understand, and what I thought I could understand, I wasn't able to access, and
Why did you go back a second time?
Well, because within the same lesson, I realized that I wasn't meant to understand. I wasn't meant to do it right. I was just meant to do it, to experience it, right? So I don't know anything about painting, but I want to buy the masterpiece. I want to buy the finished one, But I'm sure the painter does 16 sketches and 4 tests and 5 starts, and then on the 18th canvas, they finally finish it and frame it. They probably have a lot of experience of, not quite, not right, but they don't stop. It's about that expression. I think, as somebody who doesn't know anything about art, I think the point is to make the masterpiece, and then somebody will buy it, and that'll be great. But I'm sure that the artist feels like all 17, including the masterpiece, all 18, they were all important. They were all the thing. They weren't trying to finish. They were trying to have that experience and that expression. Yeah. Right? So for me, it was like, sure, I'm ungainly, and somebody said hip, and I didn't know what it was yet, and I tried to, they said relax, so I tried, but I started to realize, like, I'm not meant to do it right. I'm just meant to experience myself. And if you're authentically, sincerely experiencing yourself in the moment, it's right. It's true, right? So I'm not trying to copy somebody and mimic somebody's move. I'm trying to best moderate my being so as to experience the flow of the Tao through the self.
Now, let's say you're completely new to it and this sounds interesting to you. What's a good way to find a teacher that's right for you?
Well, I'll tell you, Ben Furman was asking a couple questions earlier, so I'll answer this in the way that his teacher answered the question for me. This is Mike Bonfilio. So he said...
this is my Taekwondo teacher.
Yeah. So what he said was, go to a class and do your absolute best to pay attention to the worst student in the class. And in that student, you will see the teacher. What I was discussing with him was how easy it is to just shift towards the better students in the class who are doing stuff great. And then obviously that teacher is really great. Look what they're able to get those good students to do, the people that are veterans. And what his teacher said, Mr. Bonfiglio, he said, look, the really good guy doing the really crazy bendy thing with ease and grace, he was going to be that way despite any type of teacher, you know?
Right.
And that was just like
John Coltrane's teacher took credit.
Yeah, and it was just like, oh, okay, right. And so really good idea is to let's say you're interested in studying Tai Chi or, testing it. Try and bring to your search for the right place the same things that you want to get out of it, right? So patience, right?
What's patience? I mean, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Patience is hard for me.
This is patience in Chinese.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Patience. A lot of people will say, I'm not so happy with such and such a teacher, and they'll explain why. And I'll say, well, I don't really do it that way. You might be happier doing it here, or you might be happier at that other teacher I know. Maybe you can go there. And then they'll say, yeah, but that's 5 minutes further. Like, you don't know how my Wednesdays are. That's kind of... I said, well, be patient to find the right teacher. And it doesn't really matter if they're a little bit more money or a little further away. They might not be. They might be closer. They might be cheaper. But you're doing it for the whole of yourself. And most students won't realize that in the beginning. They'll think they're going to do it to help their arthritic knees or their anxiety that they have about their brother-in-law that's living with them or whatever. They'll think that they have a specific reason to start doing it. But whatever the reason to start, you're doing it for your whole self. And that if you stay with it, that'll become more apparent. And your whole self is worth $5 more or 5 more minutes or whatever it happens to be. Be patient. Don't just jump into that class because it was somehow convenient. It's really important to do what's ultimately best, and ask questions of the teacher.
This may not be important, but because it's a just intellectual question, but how do you think it is that a Tai Chi, which seems to be such a physically grounded practice, has so many benefits psychologically?
Yeah. Well, that's a great one. I like that. Well, I think that whatever the psyche is, kind of like when we're talking about the spirit or the spiritual side, whatever that is, I think when it has a grounded home, it will settle. It's not as flighty and scared and jumpy and defensive. And I think to be able to provide that in the body, maybe it's just through the breath or through a standing practice, as Ben suggested, or a moving practice, to provide that ground, sort of like you'd want to provide a nice home for your children or something, a quiet place, a safe place, that sort of thing. I think that has a really profound effect on the rest of the self, including the psyche, to be able to have that place where the body's experiencing its own movement directed by its own experience, expressing its own self, the body. And when it's able to do that, it tends to be in good condition. You become familiar with it. Less of the body is unknown to the rest of the self, and then it becomes a safe place. And that safe place extends to the experience of the mind, being happy, being content, perhaps, to stay settled in the space of the body, not needing or seemingly needing to go wherever. Same thing with the psyche, Of course, the psyche also often presents itself as a type of armor, not just a sort of insubstantial experience of some level of self, but a type of armor, a warding.
Yeah.
And when we start to see that I can actually influence that which would purport to hurt me, I can influence that which would purport to get stuck in me, then there's less and less reason for the armor, because it's not going to hurt me. It's not going to stay with me. It's not somebody doing it to me. It's not purposeful. It's just life. It's just how things happen. It's ever changing, right? And I think ultimately, again, that sort of gravitational idea, the psyche and the spirit and the psychosexual self and the level of the third eye and or whatever other parts of this, they find it to be home, right? And if you were going to define the physical body, maybe the home for the rest of the self is not a bad kind of way to start.
Well, I'll let you go here in a second. But Ben, would you help me define what push hands is? Well, I mean, you could define it, but I mean, I don't want right. I didn't want him to have to. Could you summarize Steve's resume in push hands? I mean, I know, you know what I mean. I didn't want him to make him do it.
Right, and because I know.
I'll just interject before he does anyway.
Right.
So we've all forgotten the resume. So.
Well, all right. So you've done well in some competitions of this thing called push hands, and I know I'm stumbling all over this, and I apologize.
You know what I'll say is that I would just say this, and it's because he understands everything that he's just talking about. If you try push hands long enough, if you did it and you understood the idea of yielding, which is why I suck at it.
Yielding.
I don't know what. Yeah. I especially coming from a taekwondo or a hard background, I always had the hardest time, literally, in just surrendering that moment when that force builds up at a certain point, and going, okay, well, let's not fight here. And you gave me a great analogy of it once, years and years ago, where you just said, well, thank you for that. I'm going to put it over here for right now.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So I guess, other than to embarrass you, what I was trying to do was just to have you kind of
embarrass you.
No, I won't. He's a guest.
Probably not possible.
So, but push hands, I have such a pedestrian. I don't even have any kind of understanding.
Maybe I'll try a sort of a working definition
to apply to our life.
So, Taoism we just talked about for an hour, but we didn't say yin yang yet. I don't think. What do you? So, you guys probably all know it's that Grateful Dead symbol with the black and the white and the so. But apparently it was used for something before the jam bands. So the yin-yang symbol is this symbol about differentiating energies, not opposites. And their co-creative, co-mingling existence. Right? So they're mutually rising, mutually dependent, mutually interdependent. So, what Taoism is, it's balance, right, as we said. But another way to look at that is relationship. It's this and that, you and me, right? Books and internet, rain and drought, boys and girls, up and down, right? Peanut butter and chocolate, whatever. So everything is relationship. Everything is relationship. I have a relationship with my church. You have a relationship with the barista. You have a relationship with your old socks. She has a relationship with her mother. Everything is relationship. But you could see this could get really complicated because she has a relationship with her socks. You have a relationship with that other barista that you're not letting this barista know about because sometimes you get your coffee there. That's all fine. But it gets really complex because one person can have relationship with groups, and it can have relationship with other people, individual people, and it can have relationships with parts of things. So like I have a relationship with my elbow. I also have a relationship with myself and you too, right? So pretty tough. Like, how do I start? That seems really tangled really fast. Well, the most familiar unit that anybody will know is one being, one person, right? I'm familiar to a degree with a discussion group, and I'm familiar less so with my town government. It's bigger, more people. I'm definitely less familiar with Congress in the D.C. I'm definitely not as familiar with the other 6 billion people, right? So pretty easy in my discussion group. There's just the 5 of us that meet every Sunday. That's great. But even more familiar is just me. And I'm relatively familiar with my lungs and my hips and my knees and my elbow. Less so with my fascia. Less so with my lymphangian and my interstitial fluid. Even less so with the corks and the da-da-da-da, all the different parts. Because that gets really, in the same way as it going up towards Washington, D.C. and billions of people in different countries, as I get more and more finely detailed, granular in my understanding of the self, it becomes really complex. So again, the unit that I'm most familiar with, the currency, is one being.
Yeah.
So if I want to practice, here's the point, getting to the definition of push hands. I think push hands is practicing relationship. We all have relationships. Right now, I'm in the middle of 79 that I could name. Like I'm relating to this chair and the camera and my shirt to the, But when do we practice relationship? Like they just happen.
Yeah.
They sort of happen to us, like rain seems to happen to you.
Yeah.
So push hands is saying, look, relationship is everything, constant, everywhere, constant, and complex, right? But the easiest way to practice it is at the most familiar unit scale. One you and one you. Really relatively simple. And we want to practice relationship. And as Ben was suggesting, you could do it really hard and obstructionist and sprain your finger and get scared and all the rest of it. Or you could try and practice what I'm guessing you'd like to have in a relationship, which is loving, learning, accepting, releasing, opening, trusting, feeling, offering, da-da-da-da-da. Right? So push hands is a connected, right? The yin-yang symbol isn't black here and white here. They're connective, right? They're connected. It's a connected practice of two beings who are in this sacred contract to practice relationship, right? We're constantly in relationships, probably broken relationships, difficult relationships, relationships we haven't known or named or recognized or given anything to. They just happen like the barista or something. You just get your coffee and you leave.
Yeah.
But it was probably short, but it was a relationship.
Yeah.
You probably have a more meaningful relationship with the cup of coffee for an hour than that human being that said $1.75.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying one's better or worse. I'm just saying they're relationships. When's the last time you practiced the idea of relationship? Right? Well, I'm on my 4th marriage. I should be learning. Well, have you practiced anything? Or are you just on your 4th marriage? Or your 4th teacher or your 4th, piano teacher? It doesn't really make a difference. So push hands is practicing this thing that is Taoism.
Practicing it physically with another person. How do you practice relationship with another person if you're not doing push hands?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't know if this will get too meta, but I would say that's impossible. It's always push hands.
It's always push hands.
Do you know what I mean?
Kind of.
What people mean by push hands is two people connected physically and doing this little dance. But what I mean when I say push hands is everything. Every relationship is push hands. And for me, push hands is trying to have a healthy, meaningful, learning, loving, open, trusting, developing, connected, truthful, trusting, grounded, releasing, divine experience with what you're in relationship with.
Okay.
Right? Which would include this chair and my coffee and this, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
We could say, well, this is all true, which would be nice. You could say that now. Thank you. And we could say, well, how do we practice this? Well, we'll take your psyche and my spirit and we'll connect them and we'll do this thing and then we'll learn about relationships. But I'm not that familiar with the whole thing, and you're probably not familiar. But your body, moving your leg and your elbow, that's more familiar unit. So if I'm going to take a familiar unit, I'm going to start with the body, right? The path to Taoism is learning the substantial first, the physical first, the spiritual, the mental, the emotional. That comes, and it's all the same lesson. But you can learn the language with these easy rhymes down here with the body. And so, anyway, practice push hands.
Practice push hands. All I have to say now is thank you.
Yeah.
That was really, really nice introduction.
That was fun. Thank you so much.
Ben,
Thank you, Ben Furman, too, for helping out.
You're welcome. Which is also push hands.
Which is also push hands. Okay, are there any jokes for Taoism?
Life.
Life. Right. Oh, I got one more question. Sorry. If the universe is the answer, what is the question?
Why?
You're asking me why, or is that your answer?
That's the question and the answer.
You told me to be quiet, I think.
Hey, I think I told you to shut up. I can't remember.
So the trick is, are you still going?
I'm still going. Want me to shut it off?
No.
Okay.
The trick is to keep asking that answer.
Keep asking that answer. The universe?
What did you pose to me?
I said, if the universe is the answer, what is the question?
Why?
Why?
Exactly.
But now.
Why? That's what you said, I think.
Yeah, you said, I said exactly.
But to be persistent, right? Persistent.
Asking?
Perspire, persistent, leads to perspicaciousness.
What's that?
Wisdom. So, why? What's the plural?
Why do all the best one-word
Wise.
questions begin with W?
The plural of why is wise. This sounds like I am that a little bit.
Nice.
Sorry to interrupt that one.
Yeah, that's my feeling. Keep asking the question why.
All right, now we're going in for the close-up.
Keep asking the answer why, I think we said.
We're going in for the close-up, and I'm going to say...
All right, when you finish, then I'll ask my
I'm sorry, I keep lying. But
that's all right, I'm having fun.
Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss. What is that? What does follow your bliss mean to you?
It sounds trite.
Okay, what was your question?
The bliss can't be outside of now, which means here, which means I can't follow it. If I'm following it, it's not my bliss. Nothing you follow can be here. No bliss cannot be here.
Well, I guess you follow your instincts. I mean, you wouldn't have shoes on if you didn't have to have shoes on.
Usually, yeah.
And so that's a way of following your bliss.
Sounds trite.
Okay.
And here's what I mean. I talked about honesty and stuff, right?
Yeah.
It sounds trite. It's nice. It's a great needlepoint. Follow your bliss. I'll buy one. But it does help people cover over some truth because they begin, ultimately, in some way, people begin to think that bliss is not here now. Because I've heard this. I have the needlepoint.
Right.
And then how do I? And as soon as you ask that question, we can log on the computer. As soon as you ask that question, somebody's selling you something.
Sure.
And there are answers. Sure. There's a weekend workshop coming up, and there's this, and there's the guy's attunements that you can do if you hold the right crystal. Like the moment you think the bliss is not possible to be here now, it's somewhere else. The moment you think that, and you go to ask how, somebody's going to give you the answer, but they're probably selling something.
So bliss doesn't have to be like giddy, bright, flashing lights, or does it? I'm just sorry. What's your question? What's your question? And then we're gonna flash your web address. We're gonna flash your web address right here. What? He's following his bliss.
It's right here. If you're following it, stop. It's right where you are.
Can I turn the camera to you?